Deep space, the 9th of February 2142. A spaceship retrieved a strangely shaped black object from the ocean. When they returned to the space station, all the staff watched intently as they carefully cut open the object's outer shell. But at that moment, no one could have imagined the terrifying events that were about to unfold. However, none of this seemed to have anything to do with Rain. He lived on the mining colony planet Jackson, a place shrouded in perpetual darkness where every resident had only one task each day: to work for the interstellar corporation Wayland. Fortunately, Rain was about to break free from this mechanical existence. He had already accumulated enough work hours and was preparing to take his brother Andy to the habitable planet Iwaga. But how could Wayland possibly let such a useful workhorse go? With a simple flick of their fingers, the staff extended Rain's work hours by another 6 years. Before Rain could protest, he suddenly heard Andy's cries for help. He saw 3 kids beating and kicking him. Rain hurried over to chase the kids away, only to find Andy trembling all over, with white blood flowing from his head. It turned out that Andy was not human, but a defective android abandoned by Wayland. Rain's father had found him in a pile of trash and set the highest directive for him: to always prioritize Rain. After rebooting Andy's system, Rain suddenly received a message from his friend Tyler, inviting him to discuss something important and stressing that he must bring Andy along. When they arrived at Tyler's trailer, Tyler got straight to the point, opening his computer and explaining that, according to the signals he had received, there was a massive Wayland space station floating above the planet, completely inactive, as if it had been decommissioned or abandoned. That was Tyler's main target. Instead of waiting for the elusive travel permit, it would be better to use the space station to get to Iwaga. But Lane thought this was unrealistic, because Jackson was 9 years away from Iwaga, and without hibernation pods, it would be impossible to make the journey. Before he could finish speaking, the hacker Navarro chimed in, saying that he had already accessed the space station through a hyperlink and discovered that there were indeed several hibernation pods inside. However, since the space station is owned by Wayland and ordinary people can't get in, they need Andy, who also comes from Wayland, to open the hatch through the main console. Even so, Lane was still worried. After all, sneaking into the space station was illegal, and if Wayland found out, they could forget about ever leaving Jackson. But seeing the zombie-like workers around him and recalling the despicable actions of the staff earlier, Lane felt a wave of sadness rise in his heart. In the end, he decided to take a chance and bring Andy along. So, the group piloted the transport ship, slowly ascending and gradually passing through the dark, thunderous clouds. A beam of light shone straight down, filling Lane with mixed emotions. In order to allow humans to breathe on Jackson, Wayland used massive amounts of equipment to modify the atmosphere, resulting in the entire planet being shrouded in clouds all year round. This was the first time Lane had ever seen the sun, the first time he had felt its warm rays. Before he could even process his excitement, a massive space station came into view, but suddenly a warning flashed on the screen. The station would collide with an asteroid belt in 36 hours, so everyone had to act quickly. Once the ship had docked, Taylor led his younger brother Bjorn and Andy out of the hatch. Andy inserted his finger into the port and successfully opened the space station's air valve. The 3 of them noticed that dead mice kept floating and falling through the ventilation ducts. Navarro took a quick look and immediately understood. Although the space station had been abandoned, the gravity generator was still operating intermittently to prevent the station from exploding due to weightlessness. After crawling out of the duct, Taylor used a thermal scanner to locate the hibernation pods, and Andy also rebooted the ship using company data, bringing the situation under control. Taylor hurried to check the hibernation pods, only to find that the fuel inside would last for just 3.2 years. Just as everyone was feeling discouraged, Taylor came up with a new idea. Based on the thermal scanner, he determined that there was a nearby freezer, and they could use the fuel stored there to replenish the hibernation pods. So, Taylor first used the escape pod to send the hibernation pods back to the ship, then led the other 2 to investigate. But through the surveillance cameras, Lane noticed that Bjorn was constantly mocking and targeting Andy. Navarro, who was nearby, explained that Bjorn's mother had died in a mining accident last year. The android responsible for safety chose to sacrifice Bjorn's mother, who was still in the mine, in order to save more than a dozen other lives. Because of this, Bjorn harbors strong hostility toward all androids. As they spoke, the escape pod carrying the hibernation chamber had already entered the spaceship. Suddenly, Tyler's little sister Kai couldn't stop vomiting. When Lane asked, he learned that Kai was actually pregnant. This was also why she was so eager to leave Jackson. She didn't want her child to be born without ever seeing the sun. Meanwhile, Tyler and his two companions were still making their way toward the cryogenic storage room. Bjorn noticed an oil painting on the wall depicting the Great Plague of Marseille, one of the most severe epidemics in 18th century Europe, which first broke out on a merchant ship bound for Marseille. For safety, the port authorities initially wanted to quarantine the ship, but wealthy merchants, unwilling to suffer losses, forcibly unloaded the cargo, ultimately causing the outbreak of the plague and the deaths of 100,000 people. This is strikingly similar to how the Alien series begins. The shocking scene depicted in the painting sent chills down Bjorn's spine. Andy tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but it only made Bjorn more irritated. He bluntly said that once they reached Devaga, he wouldn't have to put up with Andy anymore, since that place was outside Weyland's jurisdiction and androids were strictly forbidden there. Rain knew this as well, but couldn't bring herself to tell Andy. The three of them quickly arrived at the control room. Bjorn picked up a stun baton and started fiddling with it, but Andy grabbed him abruptly. Behind him, there was a corroded hole, and next to it lay an android with only its upper body remaining. This bizarre scene made Taylor's skin crawl, and he decided to grab the fuel and leave as soon as possible. With Andy's help, they successfully entered the cryogenic storage room. Taylor discovered that there were 45 kilograms of fuel here, enough for everyone to get to Iwaga, and he quickly called Bjorn over to help. However, as soon as they took it out, a warning alarm suddenly sounded in the warehouse, and the door slammed shut. Andy tried to open it, but it showed that he didn't have sufficient clearance. To make matters worse, because the fuel was removed, the temperature in the cryogenic storage room began to rise, and the things that had been frozen were now waking up. Rain on the spaceship realized something was wrong and hurried with Navarro to provide support. He noticed the half-destroyed android and guessed that it must have access to the ship's controls, so he and Navarro removed the module from the back of its head. The two quickly arrived outside the warehouse, and Rain handed the module to Taylor. He asked her to help install it on Andy, but the system reboot would still take a few minutes. The creatures in the incubation tanks had already broken out, leaping into the water one after another in search of targets. Bjorn was suddenly knocked down, followed by a piercing scream. It was the dreaded facehugger. One of them lunged at Taylor, extending its organ, about to force it into her mouth. Fortunately, Bjorn rushed over with an electric baton and saved his sister just in time, but Taylor collapsed to the ground as a result. Just as another facehugger was about to drop down, it was suddenly grabbed by the tail by a large hand. Andy had finally woken up. He casually flung the facehugger away, used his newly acquired access to open the door, and everyone hurried to escape. However, one facehugger still managed to get in, lunging straight at Navarro, who didn't have time to react. Taylor and Bjorn rushed over to help, but Lane saw the creature's tail wrap around Navarro's neck and quickly stopped them, afraid that the facehugger would die together with Navarro. Andy also calmly explained that the facehugger didn't want to kill Navarro, but rather wanted to coexist with him. Then, Andy realized that after upgrading his module, his intelligence and physical strength had greatly improved. Unfortunately, his knowledge base remained unchanged, so he still didn't know how to deal with the facehugger. However, that android must know more secrets. Taylor lifted the half-destroyed android onto the control console, and Andy connected it to the computer, successfully awakening its consciousness. The android introduced itself as Luke, stating that its highest priority was to protect the Z01 compound. Seeing Navarro under the control of the facehugger, Luke warned everyone to kill it quickly, because the facehugger was implanting a chest burster. Once the process was complete, it would mean an even more terrifying creature was about to be born. Luke turned on the lights, revealing the corpse of an alien hanging from the ceiling. This was the very thing wrapped inside the black object at the beginning of the film. It survived even in a vacuum, and after waking up, it began a massacre, ultimately perishing together with the security team. Its acidic blood even burned through the floor, but no one cared about that. They were only concerned with how to save Navarro. Rain remembered that they could use cryogenic fuel to freeze the facehugger's tail. Taylor immediately took action and successfully made the facehugger release its tail. Bjorn followed up, pulling up the facehugger while simultaneously extracting the organ that had entered Navarro's body. But Luke poured cold water on everyone's hopes. There was a 60% chance that Navarro had already been parasitized. He grabbed Andy's hand and told him that the potential threat must be eliminated. But Bjorn didn't believe any of it. He stunned Andy with an electric shock, took Navarro back to the ship, and even closed the hatch, leaving Andy and the others outside. because Biyuan had already realized that Andy intended to kill Navarro. Meanwhile, while resting, Shao Kai noticed something was wrong with Navarro. He approached to ask what was going on, only to find Navarro's face twisted in pain, his body bulging in a bizarre way, and he was foaming uncontrollably at the mouth. In the chaos, someone kicked the control lever, causing the ship to start moving around the space station. In the next moment, Navarro's chest cracked open with a loud snap, terrifying Shao Kai so much that he let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, the ship crashed through the space station's fuel bay and spiraled out of control, flying inward. The violent shaking caused Shao Kai to lose consciousness, and the little alien finally poked its head out. The three people inside the space station witnessed this scene through the surveillance cameras and immediately decided to rush over to rescue them. But right after that, the warning alarm sounded again. The earlier collision had knocked the space station off its orbit, and there were only 47 minutes left before it would crash into the asteroid belt. Time was running out, so Ryan and Taylor didn't dare hesitate, but they hadn't gone far before they were blocked by a room full of facehuggers. Andy, meanwhile, approached Luke. Because he had used Luke's module, the highest level command had already been changed. From the database, Andy learned that the facehuggers have no vision and rely on sound and temperature to locate their targets. Ryan immediately realized that if they adjusted the room temperature to match their body temperature, they could evade the facehuggers' detection. As Andy adjusted the room temperature, the two of them carefully moved forward, and sure enough, they didn't alert the facehuggers. However, the hanging corpse gave Ryan a fright, but fortunately, Taylor calmed him down in time, preventing him from making any noise. Meanwhile, Kai had already woken up from his coma. He left the ship to look for his brother, but in the corridor, he saw a giant cocoon stuck to the wall. Baiyuan suddenly appeared behind him, signaling Kai to stay quiet. Then he grabbed an electric baton and forcefully jabbed it into the cocoon until the baton broke, causing corrosive liquid to ooze out of the giant cocoon. Baiyuan thought he had dealt with the alien, but in the next moment, a sharp stinger suddenly shot out, causing him to collapse to the ground in pain. Corrosive liquid kept dripping down, seeping into Baiyuan's chest cavity. He died in agony on the spot, while the alien fully hatched and slowly broke out of the cocoon. Kai was filled with despair and called for help from his brother through the walkie-talkie. At that moment, Tyler was still creeping forward cautiously. When he heard the sound, his heart instantly sank. But when he realized it was his little sister, he gently guided her in a soft voice, successfully helping Kai find the key and open the hatch. However, Kai accidentally fell heavily downward. The sharp, loud crash was transmitted through the walkie-talkie, making Tyler and Ryan feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. At Andy's command, the three of them sprinted forward with all their might. Fortunately, Andy had calculated the timing and closed the door just in time, allowing them to escape the danger unscathed. At this moment, there were only 30 minutes left before the crash. Kai woke up once again, nervously walked to the door, and happened to run into Tyler and the others who had come looking for him. Andy was about to open the door, but saw the alien quietly appear behind them, immediately realizing it was a trap. The reason the alien didn't kill Kai was because it was using him as bait. As the alien drew closer and closer, Kai was on the verge of a breakdown, and Tyler even knelt in front of Andy, begging desperately, but Andy remained unmoved. The three of them could only watch helplessly as Kai was impaled and taken away. This made Ryan furious, and with a slap, he struck Andy across the face, but Andy remained unfazed, coldly stating that they should leave as soon as possible before the creature arrived. Soon after, the three of them arrived at the core laboratory of the space station, where Luke's research results were stored. He discovered that the human body was extremely fragile, so he modified the alien's DNA into a Z01 compound. As long as it is injected into the body, it can bring about a new round of evolution for humans. Following Luke's orders, Andy collected all the compounds, preparing to take them back to Jackson. He then handed the pulse rifles with automatic aiming to Rain and the other person, but warned them not to fire, because they were at the lowest level of the space station. If they killed an alien here, its highly acidic blood would corrode the floor, causing the entire level to lose pressure. Andy gave them weapons only to use as a deterrent against the aliens, since those creatures are highly intelligent and know how to avoid danger and seek advantage. After saying this, the three of them began their return journey, only to find that the entire corridor had already been turned into an alien nest. They originally wanted to look for another way, but Taylor suddenly heard little Kai's voice. Without hesitation, he rushed forward and actually found little Kai tied to the wall. The two quickly rescued him, only to find that he had lost too much blood and was already on the verge of death. Andy also deduced from this that the facehugger must have seen that little Kai was about to die and thought it couldn't incubate a chestburster, so it didn't parasitize him. Andy took out a vial of compound and told Taylor to inject it into little Kai to save his life. But Lane reached out to stop him. He didn't trust that the brainwashed Andy would be so easy to fool and planned to put little Kai into the hibernation pod first, then treat him after returning to Jackson. The three of them carried little Kai to the elevator. As Taylor was lifting the iron door, he suddenly saw the xenomorph appear above. Without hesitation, he lunged at Lane, but was pierced by the creature's stinger himself. He charged upward, straight toward the xenomorph, and as Taylor turned his head, he saw even more small xenomorphs crawling toward him. He wanted to fire his gun, but unexpectedly the xenomorph in front of him opened its mouth, and its indestructible inner jaw pierced straight through Taylor's head. Lane was terrified by what he saw, and just as he was about to ask Andy for help, he realized Andy had already been taken down by the xenomorph. Left with no choice, he could only carry little Kai and escape into the elevator. On the way up, Lane saw Andy convulsing on the monitor. Thinking back on all the years they had spent together, he just couldn't bring himself to abandon him. So he stopped the elevator, had little Kai inject the compound and lie down in the cryopod, telling him to wait there until he rescued Andy and brought him back. After that, Lane climbed back down to the lower level using the ladder, holding his rifle and cautiously moving forward. After making sure there was no danger, Lane approached Andy and told him that dying here wouldn't be in the company's best interest. These words made Andy stop resisting. Lane quickly swapped out his previous module, successfully bringing back the weak but humane Andy. But the crisis was far from over and more aliens appeared ahead. Lane had no choice but to raise his gun to intimidate them and retreat with Andy. He originally wanted to hide back in the lab, but unexpectedly, Luke secretly locked the iron door. Having seen Kai return with the compound, Luke planned to sacrifice Lane and Andy. Furious, Lane fired a burst at him, but that did nothing to resolve the danger. The alien screeches grew closer and closer, like the relentless tolling of the Grim Reaper's bell. In utter despair, Andy told a joke about zero gravity, which suddenly gave Lane a flash of inspiration. He got up and turned off the gravity generator, aimed at the alien, and pulled the trigger. The highly acidic blood floated in the air without damaging the floor. Seeing this, Lane was invigorated and began his own killing spree. But after dealing with the alien, another problem arose: how to get through the corridor filled with floating acid. Gripping the handrail, Lane crawled forward bit by bit. To avoid the acid in front of him, he floated upward, but soon found himself facing another cluster of acid. Just as he was about to make contact, Lane fired his gun upward, successfully using the recoil to propel himself back into the corridor. Once they entered the elevator shaft, the two of them launched themselves upward. Unexpectedly, the space station detected the zero-gravity environment and automatically activated the gravity generator. Lane didn't have time to react and instantly plummeted downward. At this critical moment, it was actually the alien that saved him with its tail. But the alien was clearly not so easy to deal with. Hissing, it slowly approached Lane while a facehugger quietly appeared as well. Seeing Lane in danger, Andy grabbed a rifle and jumped down, taking out the facehugger before unleashing a barrage of fire at the alien. But just as one crisis was averted, another arose. There were only 10 seconds left until impact. The two of them rushed back to the ship and used autopilot to successfully escape. Watching the space station gradually collapse, Lane was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. He placed Kai into the cryopod, refused Luke's orders, and decided to head straight for Iwaja. With that, he cut off communications, leaving Luke to meet his end in anger. After refueling the cryopod, Lane was about to enter when Kai's pod suddenly sounded an alarm. His stomach was grotesquely swollen from the compound injection. Amidst Kai's agonized screams, an alien cocoon burst out from inside him. Lane immediately lost control and prepared to destroy it, but when the black cocoon opened, a baby was revealed inside, which then fell into the cargo hold as it was corroded. Lane quickly regained his composure and prepared to head to the cargo hold to deal with the creature, only to find that all that was left was the black cocoon filled with corrosive liquid and a trail of footprints on the floor that looked human, yet not quite. Meanwhile, Andy rushed over after hearing the noise and saw little Kai, covered in blood, collapsed on the ground. Following Kai's gaze, he turned his head and saw a creature, completely white and shaped like a skeleton, slowly crawling toward them. This was what little Kai had given birth to, a hybrid of human and alien. The creature grew at an astonishing rate, and in the blink of an eye it was able to stand upright. It raised its hand and slashed Andy's throat, then moved in front of little Kai and exhaled deeply. By the time Ryan returned, Andy was already on the verge of death. Ryan pressed forward with his weapon, only to find that little Kai had already been drained into a dried corpse by the creature. Ryan was shocked and hurriedly sprayed freezing fuel, but the creature knocked it away with a swipe of its hand. The dense icy mist caused the temperature to plummet rapidly, and Ryan was soon shivering and curled up from the cold. He forced himself to put on a spacesuit, which finally helped him recover, but the creature still pursued him relentlessly. Ryan suddenly noticed a jettisonable cargo bay, so he hooked a rope onto his suit and reached out to pull the control lever. But just as he was down to the last one, the creature silently landed behind him and sent him flying with a single slap. Seeing that Ryan was too weak to fight back, the creature grinned menacingly. Unexpectedly, Ryan noticed the black cocoon nearby, kicked it over and spilled the corrosive liquid inside. A powerful suction force swept in instantly. Fortunately, Ryan was protected by the rope. But just as he was about to head back, the relentless creature suddenly appeared and stabbed its sharp mouthpart toward his glass visor. In this desperate situation, Ryan noticed that the rope was resting on the last control lever. He gave a hard tug and successfully released the cargo bay, finally escaping from that terrifying creature. Ryan struggled back to the spaceship, set Ivaga as the autopilot destination, and placed Andy into the hibernation pod, planning to repair his brother once they arrived. Afterwards, Ryan lay down in the hibernation pod and recorded a message in his own voice. The end.